it's like suddenly it's kind of like uncomfortable as a leftist to be talking about like voting, and it makes you feel like you're not cool to be like vote in the general election. But what I realized, I'll start with one point. I realized when I was challenging some opinions about staying home and materialism from my perspective, some of the responses were that, well, Trump's not a fascist, because my articulation of this is we have to stop fascism. And now I'm hearing that Trump's not a fascist. Or he's the same as Biden, or Biden's a fascist. And these are real conversations that are happening in the left. And I'm really hoping it doesn't make a difference in this election and that there is a wave. But how, like, why are we eating each other alive right now? What's, Nando, I'm looking, you're like, you know what this is. We were here in 2016. I mean, why do you think people don't understand the threat of Trump?
I don't know that people, I don't think it's so much the threat of Trump that is being kind of understated. I think it's more just a feeling that we keep doing the same thing over and over again and nothing changes. And I'm sympathetic to that argument, that, when you pull the lever for the Democrats, they don't really necessarily do anything to change the broad trajectory of American politics, which is for the last 30 or 40 years been broadly a trajectory downward. They sort of kind of manage the decline in a slightly better way. That's kind of the argument. And I understand the impetus and the sort of libidinal appeal of that we just like, we're looking at someone like Joe Biden, who in any other context would be like considered a, center right politician. And that's who we have to rally around to stem the tides and the trends and reverse the downward trajectory. And the feeling is just like, that's impossible. And then there's arguments that, for example, like when Reagan sort of tanked Gerald Ford campaign in 1976 and let Carter win, and then he took over the party kind of 4 years later and really did like a massive sea change in American politics, that at some point the left has to do something like that. I just don't think the conditions are completely analogous. Carter is not like the left-wing version of Trump. I mean, Carter was basically also like a center-right politician, especially in the context of the time. He was one of the more right-wing Democrats. So it's a different context. But I understand the kind of libidinal appeal that, they forced Biden down our throats. Nobody wanted him. And he is not just like kind of your standard issue Democrat. He has been traditionally one of the worst Democrats. I mean, Biden made his career in the 1970s by being the first Northern liberal to break on busing, right? I mean, that Kamala Harris challenged him.
In the case yourself.
Like, yeah, exactly. And beyond that, like, he sort of fashioned himself as a tough on crime Democrat in the 1980s, outflanking the Reagan administration on the right on that issue. I mean, so I understand the libidinal appeal. I do think that given the pandemic, the sort of narrow argument that the Democrats will administer the pandemic in a technocratically more effective way is, I think, an incredibly compelling argument. And then other things like just that the conditions that allow for a left-wing change in this country, namely the revitalization of the labor movement, is practically impossible in the context of a far-right administration that is putting NLRB appointees that are just like fanatical anti-unionists. I don't think Joe Biden's going to name Bernie Sanders as his labor secretary, but he'll name kind of probably like standard issue Dems who aren't necessarily like super friendly to labor, but aren't also like fanatical anti-labor activists whose like main raison d'etre is to destroy unions. So there's different like conditions that apply. And I think that the arguments, I have not been convinced by any of the arguments that say that a defeat of Joe Biden and another 4 years of Trump will actually be beneficial for the left in 4 years. I don't see it. I don't think the conditions on the ground are there. There is no real power base yet to do that.
Capital was on the side of, let's just be very clear, Reagan had capital. We don't have that. And we don't have the strongest labor either. And as you mentioned with Carter was the first, modern Democratic president who really took a wrecking ball to labor. within the DNC and externally. So it's
so much so that he was challenged by Ted Kennedy from the left as a sitting president. I mean, imagine if that happened today. Imagine if Bernie Sanders had challenged Obama in 2012,
which he threatened, and that's why Obama hates him.
Yeah, maybe he should have.
Napoleon. I mean, I find this moment in the electoral cycle, repeat of 2016 was painful in 2016, but knowing very well we're in a pandemic and the crisis that we're facing, what do you think is a good issue that we should be unifying around? Like, if there is going to be some sort of solidarity on the left in pushing back against Biden, what do you think that issue should be?
I mean, I think there's several. I mean, I think the climate change and something that looks like the Green New Deal, like with Harvey K, was talking about, is something that we should use our leverage to when it comes to if Biden comes at the administration, because it's out of the question if Trump is the winner. I think you made a good analogy earlier when you said it's like there's two vehicles. And to me, it's like there's two realities in 2021. There's the Trump America or the Biden America. So whatever you do, you're going to have to deal with one or the other. Which one would you rather deal with? I mean, it's as simple as that. And also, when it comes to the counter argument, and like Nando referred to, I understand like the disenfranchisement and the feeling that the two-party system is useless. It's only helping like a small amount of people at the top. But on the other hand, it's like at least there's like a plan there. If we're saying that with Biden being at that top, we still have a way to organize and to leverage a progressive interest on him. Whereas on the other side, like if you vote, what is your plan? Like, let's say you want to vote for the Green Party, or let's say you want to abstain and not vote for anybody. Then what?
Yeah,
like,
what are you getting out of that?
I have never heard like a cohesive type of argument, like where that reality, like what are we doing then? Who's leading that movement? What is that movement about? Like, and I just don't hear it. I'm sure there's some people thinking about it, but I haven't heard anything that's compelling at this point.
Well, go ahead, Nando.
Well, the other kind of argument that I think is a little bit more subtle or a little bit more subjective is that I think that Trump, in a way, drives liberals so crazy that it makes working with them impossible, right? I mean, the 2016 primary is proof of that. Like, they're like liberals, like the vast majority of the electorate agreed with Bernie Sanders' program, but Biden was seen as more electable, and like the top priority was defeating Trump. And because Biden was just, even though Biden ran an awful campaign, like didn't organize at all, just the conventional wisdom that he is more electable because he's the vice president and because he's more moderate or whatever, that liberals were so scared of another 4 years of Trump that the only thing that mattered was Biden's electability. So like, if you've seen the last 4 years, like liberals are crazy. Like, they're just crazy about, like with Trump, like they go down all these kind of insane rabbit holes. There's like the Seth Abramson type grifters who like become these huge celebrities amongst like suburban women and stuff, who are just like desperate to get this awful man out of the White House. And it makes dealing with liberals impossible, so there is a feeling that I have, and it's, there's no kind of real data to prove it or anything. Like, it was just a feeling that at least from a voter standpoint, the context of a Biden administration would make defeating kind of moderate centrist Democrats at the congressional level or the Senate level, the things that are very crucial to build left power, are easier to do in that context, right? When there's the sort of awful threat in the White House, that becomes the focus, whereas with a sort of standard awful liberal in the White House, but at least liberals will calm down and not make the one focus that they want to do is defeating Trump. So that makes, I think, electorally, the voters may be more willing to pull the lever for someone who they agree with, but maybe suspect is not, in some conventional wisdom type thing, electable, right? So I think
we're seeing folks like, okay, so Cori Bush, for instance, perfect example. Yeah. Cori Bush was a Bernie surrogate. She's knocked down the House. She is working class. She's radically left. But liberal women are like, oh yeah, Cori Bush is great. And so and of course AOC is now having that effect too. So I mean, if there is a way that like we've been able to convince them through the more local electoral law. Basically, if Bernie's name isn't on it, and you're not some sort of emblem of the Bernie campaign, you've already brought in some of those liberals because they want to see more women in office. It's not that they're against what Cori Bush stands for, right?
No.
Or who she is.
Yeah, no. I mean, and you're seeing some of it. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's like a blanket, but I think you can see more of it in the context of, in a sort of less heightened context where the stakes don't seem so high for liberals. You can sort of convince people to vote for the program that they already agree with. I mean, the sort of broadly speaking, the Bernie-crat program of Medicare for All, Green New Deal, all those things are in line with the Democratic Party electorate. The Democratic Party base already agrees with those things. The one issue where he lost was electability. And I think that there's this idea that if you're more left, you're less electable than if you're in the center, it's just really deeply baked. And when there's the threat of Trump in the White House, that trumps everything else, for lack of a better term, no pun intended.
But I mean, it goes back to what Napoleon's saying. Like, so the Green New Deal, it's not just a leftist issue anymore. It is now something. No, sure. When you listen to some of these debates and you hear what Mayor Pete has to say about the Green New Deal or Joe Kennedy, and you get in the weeds, yeah, they're maybe subtly against the Green New Deal or just openly against Green New Deal. But generally speaking, these liberals that we're talking about are now on board on Team Green New Deal, on Team Medicare for All. They may not be supporting all the candidates that support those things, but in terms of like what arguments were presented by the Bernie campaign and the movement, it's becoming more and more popular. So I think, it's an interesting point, Nando, that like without Trump, out there, they're going to be looking for their next path, their next thing to get behind. Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, I think in a way, Trump, it's like an old leftist thing. You got to heighten the contradictions, right? You got to heighten the contradictions, but with Trump there, it's much harder to heighten the contradictions, right? Right. It's much more harder to make that case to people. I mean, liberals, Democratic voters, understandably want this disgusting man out. Like, I don't blame them, So it makes it much difficult to do that. And that's a crucial thing. Like, we have to distinguish ourselves from the sort of standard issue liberals. Like they need to be defeated. They are an impediment to change. They absolutely are. And I just find it difficult. I mean, in the past 4 years are proof of that it's difficult to do that because Biden, this candidate that like nobody really wanted, like really nobody actually like was a huge Biden head, won in a landslide.
I bought the hat, damn it.
Yeah, a guy who could barely speak, like he was barely campaigned. He won in a landslide. Because it was much harder in the context of Trump to heighten those contradictions.
So what contradictions, Napoleon, like right now, next 3 weeks, if we're sitting here saying, all right, like we're obviously not the biggest fans of Biden, but this is why, coming back to the original point about fascism, if it looks and sounds like a fascist, if he's threatening to not abdicate his position, I don't know what else that is. Right. And I don't know why we're suddenly having a debate over, is Biden a fascist versus is Trump a fascist? So if those are the two, if that's how we heighten the contradiction, or that's how I'm heightening contradiction, is that we need a popular front against fascism. It's not for Biden, it's against fascism, but that's not sinking. Then what is that? What are we distinguishing ourselves on right now?
I mean, there's still COVID going on. It's when you look at the rally that happened the other day and the way Trump is like kind of jokingly talking about COVID, and maybe you're going to talk about this later, but I mean, isn't that a sharp contrast? Like, do we really trust even Trump promoting his vaccine like it's like a salesman, like, you know what I'm saying? And like, there's that contradiction, like we're in the middle of a pandemic, so people are going to die. People are dying every day by the thousands. I don't know the actual numbers, 220,000 or something like that. Immediately, that I think that's a stark contradiction between both of them right there, that it will affect people that personally. So it's like for us not to put them together like they're both two evils or whatever. No, there is a stark contrast between both of them. I think COVID is an important thing. We're dealing with a big crisis that we haven't dealt with for like almost a century or something like that. And I think to me it's compelling because I think people are suffering from it. If not directly, indirectly, we are, because of the way it's affecting our lives, because of the mismanagement of it. We can't do what we want to do. Maybe this lockdown, this whole, all these policy, maybe the things could have opened up a little earlier, or we could have had a better solution to it. And I think with a Biden administration, I at least trust that they would handle this better than what Trump is doing.
Yeah, both things are true that, after 4 decades of neoliberalism, these basic institutions that govern American life have been hollowed out to the point where it's difficult for even basic things to happen, basic things that other countries just take for granted. Like we can't even deliver unemployment checks in an efficient and logical manner. The basic just functions of the state have been so degraded that even like the best administrator possible would have like struggled to institute a coronavirus response that was logical and reasonable. But it is also true that the Trump administration has grossly mismanaged the pandemic and that hundreds of thousands of people have died unnecessarily as a result. Like, I don't think we would have had, the Danish response to the coronavirus pandemic had, Barack Obama been in power during the pandemic, but it wouldn't have been 220,000 people.
They would have looked at the CDC's recommendations to start. They would have
just basic
listened
stuff.
to the WHO in December to start. I mean, this isn't rocket science here. Like, they're there to keep the state neutral, to keep it just enough so that people aren't out on the streets, which of course they are, and they have been. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.